Right guys, hi there, this is Scapegoat Stephen. We're going with a new series of videos at the moment. I'm just going to quickly look through the Iron Kingdoms books. There are currently 4 books available for the Iron Kingdoms RPG. This is the main one, this is the Core Rulebook. This is the hardback. I think it only comes in hardback there, that's how thick it is. It's at 300 and pretty much 360 pages worth of stuff in here. So, as with always, with PP's hardcover books, got this lovely detailed internal page. It's a nice bit of artwork there of Tarin, Rutger and their nomad who has yet to make it to the tabletop. You got your credits, table of contents, and as you can see we're split into several sections. You've got the history of Western Immoren, and that runs all the way up to page 50. We have Life in the Iron Kingdoms, which runs from page 51 all the way through to page 104. And then we've got character building from page 105 to 196. The game itself, so basically how to do rolling, from page 197 to 226. We've got magic from 227 to 246. We've got gear, mechanica and alchemy from 247 to 298. We've got steamjacks from 299 to 326. Then you've got into the basically the GM's role, which is page 327 to 339, and then you've got Appendix A, which is the bestiary, Appendix B, which is gameplay tools, and Appendix C, which is templates, and then you get the index. So as you can see, it's quite a detailed book. So obviously this is just all about how the what you'll need, what is role playing, you know, the sort of terms that if you aren't used to playing RPGs before, it'll get you into that mindset. Here we go, straight into the Welcome to the Iron Kingdoms with a nice detailed map. Cador, Ord, Signar, Crix, Protectorate, Ios, Rull and Lael. Laid there right for you. And then we're straight into the history of Western Immoren. Now there's a lot in here. I'm not obviously going to go over it all. I might do future videos about the background behind the IK world, not just the RPG, obviously the game as well. But as you can see, there's quite a lot here, and the detail and the finish on this book is one of the best I think that I've ever seen from such a big RPG book as well. I have done various other RPGs before. I have done Vampire the Masquerade and several of its accompanying offshoots, I guess. I've also done D&D in the past. IK RPG is the first one I've ever felt the need to actually use models for, mainly for combat more than anything else. You don't necessarily need the models obviously for standard roleplay, but the models are quite useful for combat, just for figuring out where you all are. So there we go. And then we're into Life in the Iron Kingdoms. Again, nice bit of artwork there. Talks about the kingdoms themselves, so Signar, Cador, Divided Lael, Ord, the Protectorate of Menoth, and then things like Crix, Ios, Rull. Now there is obviously short bits here about Crix, Ios and Rull. My understanding is that there will be a further RPG book at some point further down the line which discusses Ios, Rull and Scorn, I believe is the other option, although Crix might be another interesting one for them to do, just because what's it like to not be one of the undead minions in Crix? What's it like to live in Crix? So they're into the non-human races. Gobbers, Bogrin, Trollkin, Dwarves, Ogrin, Iosians, Elves, Nis, which are other elves. I won't say Dark Elves because they're not Dark Elves. And I did accidentally skip. Here's all the other ethnic groups in the Iron Kingdoms. So there's a lot of them: Caspians, Solese, Idrians, Cards, Cossites, Midlanders, Morodanes, Rin, Shard, Skirov, Thurians, Tordorans, and Umbrians, and various, and then just assorted others at the bottom there. So we've got languages. You've got Caspian, which is an extinct language. I'd imagine it's similar to Latin in that regard. You've got Signaran, and therefore also Sulese, Laelese, Ordic, Shard, and then you've got a ton of different other lesser spoken languages, like these are like the Cadoran ones. So you've got Cadoran, Umbrian, Cossite, Kurzik, and then the Mulgur language, Mulgur, Gobrish, Mulgur Og, Mulgur Troll, They're like the Trollkin and Ogrian and Gobbers, that sort of races. You've got Moradane languages, so Moradane itself is extinct. You've got the Idrian, Thurian, and then you've got Rulik, Sheer, Auric, and then various obscure languages. Then we get into the whole steam power and how steam industry came about in the Iron Kingdoms. You've got the Mercurian League, rule of law, how education, commerce and travel are dealt with, coins, including their value and what metal they're made of, which is quite a nice one, quite a nice touch if you've got people like that in your system that want that sort of level of detail. You've got military service, how magic is viewed, how arcanists and sorcerers are viewed, because they are different. Gun mages, which is a very distinctly different type of magic. Necromancy, infernalism, alchemy, and then you get into mechanica, so you got your jacks itself, your warcasters, religion, so you got the dominant faiths, which is the Church of Morrow, and it goes into quite a bit of detail about them. Tharmarite cults, Menite Temple, and then other faiths such as the Cult of Cyrus, Cults of the Devourer Worm, Dunian, the Church of the Great Fathers, the Fane of Nisor, the Fane of Skyra, and the 3 sects within the Skyra. And we're into character gen. So that's 103 pages worth of background. So as you can see, it's going to take me a while to compile all that to discuss it in separate videos, but there you go, 103 pages. Then we're into characters, basically how you gen your character. In this system, you not only do you pick a race, but you actually pick 2 classes, and the way you can do that is they can be complementary or or not at all related, to basically cover your own weaknesses or make you a super specialist at things. So you can play a human or a dwarf. Sorry, before we get into the races, you get these values down here. These are your starting values, and then you may improve them up to hero level, and then there's what we call a vet level and an epic level as well, which shows basically the maximum you can go up to in each of these stats. You also have archetypes, which we'll get to in a minute, but they're gifted, intellectual, military or skilled. So we have humans, dwarves, gobbers, Iosians, Nis, Ogren, Trollkin. So gifted, magic users, is probably the easiest way of saying it. Intellectual, kind of speaks for itself really, sort of smarter characters. Mighty, so it's more combat oriented on the physical aspects of combat, as in the full-on brute force, whereas skilled is the more dexterous, I guess, is probably the best way of equating it. More fleet and nimble characters tend to be more skilled. They all have their own sort of mini bonuses associated with the class. So yeah, like I said, you choose 2 careers, and then here's like some of the limits on what certain careers require. Like some of them are gifted because you have to be a mage or a magic user, sorry I should say, to be able to use certain classes. Then it talks about general skills, customization and options, and then we're into the actual classes. So there's alchemist, arcane mechanic, and you see some lovely artwork here. Arcanists, aristocrats, bounty hunters, cutthroats, duelists, explorer, fellcaller, field mechanic, gun mage, highwayman, investigator, iron fang, knight, mage hunter, men at arms, military officer, pirate, pistolier, priest, ranger. It's also, priest is subsplit into Morrow and Menoth. Ranger, rifleman, soldier, sorcerer, spy, stormblade, thief, trencher, warcaster. There you go. So there's a lot of classes to choose from, bearing in mind that the further expansion books have other classes. No Quarter often brings out further classes as well. So it's nice. There's a nice spread there of options, even from just the base book. Then you just put in your life, you finish off your life spiral, you put in like additional equipment, all this sort of thing. Then the interesting thing is your group, providing it fills certain criteria, get what is called an adventuring company. Sort of if you all start out knowing each other, basically it gives rewards for all working together. So you can do things like you can be an arcane order, intrepid investigator, law dogs, a mercenary charter, which is the most generic, outlaws, spy ring, pirates of the broken coast. All of that, again, you get, there are requirements to it, but there are also benefits from it. So they are well worth considering. You know, don't all gen in isolation, gen a group together to follow one of these. and personally I think that means you come out much better off as a group with a more cohesive idea, and the benefits are always nice little extras at character gen. Talks about earning experience and how you advance in the system. We go into sort of your abilities, which aren't your skills. These are like one-shot abilities. As you can see, there's quite a lot of them, so I won't go through every single one of them. But they're the sort of things that, if you do play War Machine and Hordes, the sort of things you'd expect to see like solos to have, basically. Because the way I equate Iron Kingdoms RPG is essentially you're playing really powerful solos in the game, and I think that's probably the easiest way to consider the characters you play. They're just powerful solos from the tabletop war game. Connections, basically you have connections to a certain group or organisation prior to character gen, but there are all sorts here, like Alchemical Order, Criminal, Dwarven Clan, Intelligence Network, they go on. And then we're into skills themselves, which are split into military skills and occupational skills. Military skills, basically what weapons you can use. So you've got all these ones down here, there's not a massive amount. And then you've got occupational skills and general skills. Occupational skills you generally have to gain by your class. There are a couple of other things that will give you them, but generally speaking they're things that you can only have in class and learn from being that class. Then general skills are stuff that I think pretty much everyone can do, like jumping, riding, swimming, climbing, all that sort of jazz. So then obviously we've got a lot of pages devoted to these skills, including things like target numbers when you're rolling to pass a certain test. So yeah, as you can see, quite a lot in here. Again, it's very nicely laid out. There's some amazing artwork in here. A lot of it is recycled from the Forces books, I'll give them that, but a lot of it is quite new as well, and quite nice, and definitely worth a look through in the book. So we get into the game itself, how the game, just things like silly things like making resolution rolls on skills or attributes, that sort of thing. Combat, how combat works. Again, as I said, it's like basically solos fighting solos. If you're used to the war game, it's very simple. It's usually 2d6, add your score, beat target amount. For instance, if your opponent has defense 15, I have rat 7, I need to roll an 8 or more on 2 dice to hit. Nice and easy. Covers all things like attack rolls, like when enemies are in melee, all the sort of things you'd expect an RPG to cover. It works really well. I think it helps that from my personal background, obviously I've played the game, the war game, so I know a lot about how the mechanics already work, but there are subtle differences in some of things like the spells and abilities that's worth paying attention to. You've got your injury table should you ever cripple anyone in your game. I don't think we've had anyone oh, actually no, I lie. I think we've crippled our my wife's character at one point. I think she had a broken leg. Well, that's healing obviously, so it gets better. Things like continuous effects, so damages, immunities, knocking people out. Feat points. Now feat points are something, because obviously you don't have a feat, you're not in the tabletop war game, but you have 3 feat points. These regenerate when you get a critical success on a skill or an attack roll. Get one because the game master decides you can have one, or you incapacitate or destroy an enemy with an attack. So you can spend them to boost non-attack skill rolls. You can boost them to half the damage from one attack rounding up. You can spend one to make a quick action, to gain parry, to gain relentless charge, to re-roll a failed attack, skill or willpower roll, to run and gun, which basically means you run and then still take an action. Shake continuous effect, shake knockdown, shake stationary, sprint. So if you incapacitate or destroy an enemy with a melee attack, you can then run away. A two-fister, which basically means you can ignore the attack roll penalty for fighting with 2 weapons, and walk it off, which means you gain D3 plus 1 vitality points, so basically you heal. I found that because I can kill quite a lot of things quite quickly, because I'm playing a gun mage, a gun mage pistolier as well, so classes back each other up quite nicely, is I tend to spend feat points quite a lot to then gain them back pretty quickly. So it's quite use them is my advice, or if you think the enemy's particularly nasty, save them for halving damage. Goes into terrain types, and then terrain features, damage to inanimate objects and structures, how anxiety, fear or terror affect people, how light and dark affects people, And then we're into magic. I love this bit of artwork, it's amazing. So it discusses divine magic, including runes, formula, will weavers and focusers. Focusers being warcasters, will weavers being pretty much everything else. Talks about warcaster armor, gun mage and rune shots, because they're very specific. Then it goes into things like control area, casting a spell, you know, the sort of things you'd expect, like, you know, your range and stuff. Then we go into the actual spell lists available, because as you can see, all the spells are just listed, so this just tells you which spells you can take as specific classes. And then the sorcerer there and warcaster there, arcane mechanic, arcanist, gun mage, and then priest of Morrow, priest of Menoth. And there's a lot of spells here. These are the things that differ the most, I would say, from the tabletop wargame, because some of them have the same name but aren't necessarily the same spell. Nice bit of artwork there. If anyone's got one of the more recent High Command expansions, she's apparently a new Leylee's warcaster. Looking forward to seeing her on the table at some point, maybe further down the line eventually. Then we get into gear, alchemy and mechanica, discussing price lists for things like, this is generally as well where you buy all your stuff at Character Gen from, so there's quite a few pages worth there, listing pretty much everything you could conceivably want out of your game. And then we get straight into the basically the nuts and bolts, if you'll pardon the expression, of all the weapons, including some nice pictures of some weapons. Then we get to the ranged weapons. Nice artwork here. Ammunition, clothing, equipment, things like gas masks, pocket watches, mounts, should you wish to buy horses, because they're expensive, board and lodging, mechanica items. Now these tells you how to make one, because obviously you can't just buy them on the open market, although it does give you a cost for the components should you be in that sort of business, because then obviously you can cobble things together as characters. Rune plates, which can then power mechanica items, including an example, goggles, farsight goggles, which are pretty much just binoculars, are 790 gold, which is quite a bit. Most characters start with between 100 and 200. Prosthetic limbs, should you have the money after one of yours gets chopped off. Warcaster armour and the rules behind that. Straight to alchemy, another nice bit of artwork there. What it does, how much stuff costs to buy as individual, and then how much it costs to buy fully finished potions. Grenades, which fall under alchemy. Again, lovely bit of artwork. Some gators, tatzelworm, and then obviously steamjack section. One of the everyone wants to know how to make and fight with a steamjack. She's got like labour jacks, which are obviously the stuff we don't tend to see in the war game, and then we're into combat jacks. Most of these are Audic jacks, like the generic jacks. Find the more specific jacks will be in one of the later expansions, which we'll get around to doing a video of soon. There's all the different weapons you can buy and all the arc node upgrade type things, bucklers, heavy boilers, hydraulic cranes, all this sort of stuff. And then obviously into the rules themselves about steamjacks, about power attacks, when they move, crippling systems, their damage grid, all this sort of stuff. And this is what happens when you do catastrophic damage. You have to roll on a table and give a quirk to your jack due to it. Wrecking a steamjack, salvaging one, repairing one in the field, you know, that sort of thing. Repairing cortexes, controlling a jack, marshalling a jack specifically, because obviously a lot of characters will probably more likely be able to do that than be full-on warcasters. Imprints, so if you've got a warcaster and your jack has been alive and with you for quite some time, you can cause an imprint. And then we're into the role of the game master, basically just discussing again the usual sort of thing you'd expect, talking about how to build NPCs, talking about how to build certain scenario types. Basically, if you haven't run games before, it's very useful. It gives you some ideas for plot hooks, like, you know, you're doing mercenary campaigns, urban campaigns, Tomb Raiders, exploration, Royal Court Cloak and Dagger style. Then we're into the appendix. Some of the more common denizens that aren't necessarily on the in the tabletop war game at the moment. So you've got Boromaugs and Dregs. Then we're into Pharaoh, which obviously are in the game. Humans, you may have encountered some of those in the game. Thralls, Thralls. It's a very basic bestiary, and then we're into the gameplay tools. So there's the character sheets, NPC encounter sheets for the game master to do, and then your templates, so rep markers, sprays at wall, blast damage, and then into the index. We are partway through a campaign at the moment, which is quite enjoyable actually. We're having a good laugh. I think this is a very reasonably simple game to pick up and play. Especially if you're already an experienced RPGer, the system itself is quite nice to run. It's also an excuse to do a little bit of converting with some models. Yeah. Overall, I'm enjoying it. It's a good book. It's nicely put together. It's not on the cheap side. I think it's about 30 quid, but then again, I think you get a lot of use out of that 30 quid. So arguably, it's worth it. I'd recommend it to people. You can get digital copies of this as well via the PP Digital app, or various RPG websites now do digital PDF downloads. It's very good. I enjoyed it. Some lovely artwork in there, some great ideas for characters. So yeah, I would recommend it. The only thing that you really need is, I would say, you need an extensive terrain collection, because you can always do it with I guess pieces of paper, as you know, that piece of paper is a building, that sort of thing. But it doesn't hurt to have a reasonable supply of both terrain and models, especially for if you get into a combat situation, you need to map it out better. That was how it is probably its only downside. It probably does need the miniatures for combat related games, but not necessarily so much for more politically intrigue, investigative type games, shall we say. Right, so that was my look at the core Iron Kingdoms RPG book. Like I said, it was a very quick look through just to show you sort of the detail and the amount of stuff that was in the book. I hope to come back with Kings, Nations and Gods soon, and just give you a quick look through of that. So for now, this is Scapegoat Stephen saying goodbye.